Hello and welcome to the Genuine Learning blog. My name is Melissa Galasso, and today we're going to look at something a little unusual. We're going to look at standards set by IESBA, and IESBA is the international ethics. And so the AICPA Professional Ethics Executive Committee looks closely at changes that happen for IESBA when they are doing their own standard setting. And recently, in April, IESBA issued 2 new ethics changes that we wanted to make you aware of in case the AICPA Professional Ethics Executive Committee decides to take a look at them. 2 really interesting areas. The first one is related to fee provisions. Obviously, we have some guidance in the standards right now about overdue fees, right? We can't perform services if the client owes us that's more than a year old. This takes it definitely one step further. And so the concept here is when fees are negotiated with and paid by an audit client, there's actually a self-interest threat that might create an intimidation threat to independence. So the concept here is we're obviously trying to have a profitable business, right? Auditors are in a for-profit business. And so there is a self-interest threat. And so factors that we need to consider when evaluating these, the level of threat created for fees for an audit or any other service, the level of fee and the extent to which they have regard to the resources required. Obviously, firms' commercial and marketing priorities, linkage between the fees for the audit and those for other services, the relevant size of them, whether the fee is for services to be provided by the firm, the level of fee in the context of the service to be provided, the operating structure and compensation arrangement of the firm and the firm networks, the significance of the client or third party referring the client to the firm, the nature of the client, for example, whether the client is a public interest entity, the relationship of the client to the related entities to which the services other than audits are provided. So, for example, sister entities, the involvement of those charged with governance in appointing the auditor and agreeing fees, whether the level of fee set is set by an independent third party, such as a regulatory board, and whether the quality of the firm's work is subject to review by an independent third party, such as an oversight board. So the key here is determining the fees to be charged to an audit client, whether for an audit or other service, is a business decision, right? So at the end of the day, we're in business to make a profit. We have to have certain economics considerations. And so we have to make sure, given obviously the technical and professional standards, that we are not having an issue. So factors that are relevant in evaluating the level of self-interest and intimidation threats created by the level of audit fee paid, the firm's commercial rationale for the fee, and whether undue pressures has been or is being applied by the client to reduce the fee. So this has been very interesting. Obviously, some of the terminology you're going to see here is related to the international standards. So things like intimidation threat. We'll also see non-assurance service. Some of these are different, obviously, than the terminology we use here in the United States. But the concept here is obviously, is the client, negotiating a fee that is too low for the amount of work that needs to be performed, right? That actually can create a threat to our independence. So a firm should not, or shall, so that's the equivalent of must, not allow the audit fee to be influenced by the provision of services other than audit to an audit client. So again, thinking about if we're providing non-attest services and they are obviously typically more profitable than an audit, right? That should not be, part of the consideration here. So factors that are relevant in evaluating the level of the threat, the ratio of the fee for services other than the audit to the audit fee, the length of time during which the large proportion of fees for services other than audit fees has existed, the nature, scope, and purpose of those services, whether they are reoccurring or whether they're performed according to law or regulation. So you're starting to see here a focus on potentially, if we're providing a significant level of non-audit services, that fee could obviously trigger an independence issue. Overdue fees, consistent with what we look here at the United States, the level of self-interest threat might be impacted if fees payable by an audit client are for services other than for an audit or services other than an audit are overdue. Obviously, we'd expect payment before we issue the report. We also look at fee significance. Is there a particular client to which we have we consider it a concentration where it's a large proportion of the total fees for the firm, and it would be devastating potentially to the firm to lose this client? In that scenario, obviously that is a potential self-interest threat and potentially a intimidation threat that needs to be considered. So for non-public interest entities, so again, focusing more on the equivalent to the AICPA than the PCAOB, when for each of the 5 consecutive years, total fees from audit clients from an audit client represent or are likely to represent more than 30% of the total fees by the firm. So again, a very significant client here. The firm shall determine whether either of the following actions might be a safeguard to reduce the threats to an acceptable level. So first, prior to the audit opinion being issued on that 5th year financial statement, having a professional accountant who is not a member of the firm expressing the opinion review the work, or after the audit opinion of the 5th year financial statement has been issued and before the opinion on the 6th, have a professional accountant who is not a member of the firm expressing the opinion on the financial statement or professional body review the 5th year's audit work. So you can see here a movement towards really looking at how we negotiate fees. Are fees appropriate for the amount of work we're doing? Do we have a concentration issue? Are we charging appropriately? Is the client putting fee pressure on us? And are we being paid timely? Being directly addressed in this new standard. In addition, they're looking at what they call non-assurance services. We would call them non-attest services here in the United States. And they are also making revisions here as well. So there is a new general prohibition on the provision of a non-assurance service to an audit client that is a public interest entity if the provision of that service might create a self-interest threat. So again, they're holding down much harder on the public interest entities than they are on their non-public entities. When a firm or network firm provides a non-assurance service to a client, there might be a risk of the firm auditing its own work, giving obviously rise to a self-review threat. So before performing any non-assurance services, a firm shall determine whether the provision of services creates a self-review threat, right? The results of the work will form part or affect the accounting records. In the course of the audit team will evaluate or rely on judgments made or activities performed. And so obviously as part of this, a heavy focus on those charged with governance. A firm must communicate with those charged with governance of a public interest entity before the firm can provide non-audit assurances to the entity within the corporate structure. And again, the purpose of this is to enable them to be able to have that effective oversight. So we're seeing a focus on fees and non-assurance services. It also adds that the concept of self-review threat, materiality, is not relevant if it is a public interest entity. They do have a series of safeguards that can be applied. So threats to independence created by providing non-assurance services or multiple services to an audit client vary. So using a professional who is not on the engagement team, having an appropriate reviewer not involved, or obtaining a pre-clearance of the service from the appropriate authority. Sometimes, though, there is just no safeguard available. Nothing would reduce it to an acceptable level. In that scenario, we need to change the scope of the proposed work, decline or end the service that created the threat, or end the audit engagement. So really important considerations here. We will look to see whether Peak takes these up in some of their upcoming meetings. So that's a wrap on this week's blog. Thank you for joining us, and I hope to see you on a future blog. Have a great day, guys. Bye-bye.